Welcome to the podcast. I'm Angela Bobier, and this is Life in the Talbot Settlement, brought to you by Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. In this series, we will do our best to give you a full appreciation of the history of Western Elgin County in southwestern Ontario, from First Nations to the early settlers to the 1950s. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge funding from Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Today you're going to hear the story of a farmer turned soldier, considered a hero by all who hear of how he helped turn the tide at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. I'll provide an introduction, and local military historian and author Blair Ferguson will tell you the rest. And now, Victoria Cross honoree Ellis Wellwood Sifton. Ellis Sifton was born in Wallacestown on October 12, 1891, to parents John Sifton and Amelia Bobier. They were farmers, and the family farm was just west of the town. The Siftons were prominent citizens at Wallacestown and were active in many ways of local clubs, such as Wallacestown Sportsmen's Association, sometimes called the Wallacestown Rifles. They were also very active and faithful members of St. Peter's Anglican Church in Tyrconnell, which is just down the road from Backus-Page House Museum. Sadly, Ellis lost his mother to tubercular pneumonia on June 13, 1912, leaving the duties of the woman to Ellis's two sisters, Ella, born in 1886, and Lila, born in 1888. When England declared war on Germany on June 28, 1914, Canada, as part of the Empire, started sending its young men to assist in the turmoil. By October 7, 1914, a second contingent of men was required to enlist to help with the war effort. Ellis, being a young unmarried man seeking adventure and having a deep sense of duty to help his fellow man, went to St. Thomas to enlist in the local regiment, the 25th Infantry. Ellis enlisted on October 23, 1914. The following day, he is sent to London to Wolseley Barracks. Ellis starts his training and also starts writing letters home to his sisters. Through a series of these letters, one can trace and piece together the events leading up to the action that would earn him the Victoria Cross. His early letters are what you'd expect from a young brother to ask his sister, looking for comforts of home and news and what he's missing in the going-ons in Wallacestown. On December 12, 1914, the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st Battalions are formed into the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade. Ellis's letters tell his sisters of his training, what he does in his free time, and frequent visits to his cousins out at 34 Craig Street in London. By April 6, 1915, Ellis is feeling impatient to, quote, get over there, so he can do his bit. He asks his sisters not to come over to London to see him off when they leave for the East, as, quote, it would be easier on us all, end quote. By April 18, 1915, Ellis and the rest of the brigade have arrived in Halifax, where they board the ship, the HMS Grampton, to sail to England. On April 29th at 6 a.m., Ellis steps onto English land. Ellis's letters continue and talk of the English countryside and his life in camp. His sisters write to him telling of young men from the Wallacestown area that are putting on concerts, and one is driving around town taking girls for rides in an automobile. On June 3, 1915, Ellis writes in return, quote, really, it is disgusting the unpatriotism of the young men who have not taken care to enlist, end quote. And another quote from Ellis, truly it can be said Canadians are no good, end quote. Ellis's attitude and demeanor has started to change. The next letter, dated September 18, 1915, Ellis and the 18th are in France, heading for Belgium, and he can hear the guns. By October 17th, he very casually tells his sisters that his battalion have had several killed and more wounded. Quote, one must expect that, he ends his note with. On November 23rd, Ellis asks his sisters to get their cousin Stuart Pierce to go and get him made a pair of high leather lace-up boots and a pair of leather gauntlets to replace the ones provided by the army. And now I'm going to let Blair Ferguson, local historian, tell you the rest of Ellis's story.
Everybody had tried to take Vimy Ridge. Britain had tried it many times in France, and nobody could do it. And so Arthur Currie asked to do it, and they said, sure. And he said, well, I got to do it my way. I'm not doing it your way. I'm going to do it my way. And so what Arthur Currie came up with was a creeping barrage. And so he taught all the Canadians to walk at a particular pace. And if you walked too fast, you would have gotten blown up by the shells. And if you got left behind, then the line wouldn't be solid and you'd be a sitting duck for German machine gunners. So everything was going great. They started shelling at like 5:30 in the morning, and these guys were doing the Vimy walk, is what they called it. And the whole Canadian line was going up all in unison. But for whatever reason, there was just one section of the hill that they got held up. And I don't know if it was because the wire didn't get blown, because that was the purpose of the creeping barrage, was to blow up the barbed wire. So I'm not sure if a section didn't get blown up, so they got held up behind. And in military or in football game, you don't want to get flanked. And so what was happening is that the line was continuing up, but this section was back here, and so it was leaving this big gap that the Germans could have came into. And Ellis Sifton, he was in charge of a platoon, and they were trapped in a slit trench, and there was a German machine gun nest right up above them. And every time one of his men stuck their head up, because they knew they had to get ahead, they had to maintain that line. So every time somebody stuck their head up to see if they could go, this German machine gunner would get them. And so eventually, Ellis Sifton just kind of had enough, and he jumped out of the slit trench and just started running up the hill with his bolt-action rifle. They say that he got shot a couple of times on the way up, obviously not fatally, but in the arm and stuff like that. And he was just like in a mad fury, running up this hill, and he dove head first into the machine gun nest and kind of somersaulted over and came up and shot all of the crew from the machine gun operation. So I think it was 5 guys that he killed, and then he stuck his head out of the slit and kind of waved all the Canadians up. So they started going forward, and they say that you could hear the cheering when they saw Ellis waving them up, because nobody else was going to do that. And so the line became solid again. And as his men were approaching the machine gun nest, Ellis heard people coming down a supply trench, and Ellis was out of ammunition, so he held his Lee Enfield Mark III like a baseball bat, and each guy that popped out of this supply trench got belted, and eventually the Germans stopped coming down the supply trench because they were piling up. And by that time, the Canadians, the whole corps had reached the top, and a huge celebration broke out, and people were cheering, and all these people were patting him on his back, and his commanding officer was like, that was amazing. And a dying German officer rolled over, pulled out his Luger, and fired and shot Ellis Sifton in the head, and so he died instantly. So, and for that act, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. Pretty amazing, especially coming from a country gentleman, right? He was a farmer, and he wasn't a violent man, and he was a good shot. He won many times at the Wallacestown Sportsman Association. He won best shot. It was either him or his dad every year who won the best shot. So, yeah, by all accounts, he was a very quiet, sort of humble sort of guy, So it makes that act that much more so.
Thank you, Blair, for sharing Ellis's story and for your work visiting local high schools, paying tribute to the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces, and teaching everyone the importance of keeping the sacrifices and memories of veterans alive. Blair is the author of Southold Remembers, the Fingal Observer, No. 4 Bombing and Gunnery School book. Books about Ellis Wellwood Sifton can be purchased in the gift shop at Backus-Page House Museum. And please join us in 2 weeks for another episode of Life in the Talbot Settlement. Thank you for listening. Please share the podcast with your friends and follow us on all social media platforms at Backus-Page House. The Backus-Page House Museum and Tyrconnell Heritage Society acknowledges the land we are on today as the traditional territory of First Nations people. As settlers at a settler-focused museum, we value both the significant historical and contemporary contributions of all Original peoples and ask how we can be supportive in Indigenous cultural renewal. Life in the Talbot Settlement is a production of Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Your host has been Angela Bobier. Music provided by Jack Witmer. And thanks to our producer, Katlyn Reintsma. To make a charitable donation, become a Tyrconnell Heritage Society member, and to contact the Backus-Page House Museum, please visit our website, www.backuspagehouse.ca. Thank you again for listening.